Some trains arrive late, but some people are left behind with no one coming for them at all. That afternoon, the station was wrapped in dust and wind. Folks came and went, each one claimed by a waiting embrace, except for one woman standing alone. Margaret, over 50, large-framed, clutching a small bag as if it held the last pieces of her life. No one came. No expectant eyes searched for her. Only the quiet sting of whispers carried on the whistle of the departing train. And then, a tall man appeared. Not to meet her, not to rescue anyone. He simply walked past, looking at her for a long moment silent. What he didn't know was that the two children trailing behind him would run toward Margaret instead, wrapping their arms around her legs and whispering a word she thought she'd never hear again: Mama. Why would those children call a stranger that? What will the man do when he sees it? And how could a woman once abandoned, rejected, and unwanted end up becoming the safest place in the world for someone else's heart? This isn't just a story about late-blooming love. It's about how a heart once broken can still shelter the smallest, most fragile souls. Do you believe that sometimes family finds you instead of you finding them? The afternoon sun hung low over Dry Creek Station, pouring its dusty light over warped boards and the cracked platform. The wind carried the faint scent of iron rails and stale tobacco, curling between the posts where passengers leaned, waiting for anyone to step down from the train. But Margaret Hale knew no one would be waiting for her. She stood apart, her figure casting a long, unflinching shadow. Her carpet bag sat at her feet, its worn leather straps frayed from too many miles. The others, women in fine hats, men in pressed coats, gave her sideways glances. Some whispered, their eyes darting over her broad shoulders, the way her dress strained gently at the seams. The letter she'd clutched all the way from Kansas still rested in her pocket. A promise of a home, of a man who claimed to need a wife, someone sturdy enough to run a ranch. She had believed him, until the train arrived and no one came forward. The station master avoided her eyes. A mother tugged her daughter away when Margaret offered a soft smile. The murmur of the crowd thickened, a mix of curiosity and something sharper, pity perhaps, or judgment. She told herself she could stand it. She had weathered worse: a marriage proposal rescinded when she was 20, a lifetime of being called too much or not enough. But the stillness of being left here in plain sight gnawed deeper than words. Then a voice, low, steady. Ma'am. She turned. A man stood a few paces away, broad frame, weathered hat shadowing his eyes. Two children peeked out from behind his legs, one clutching the hem of his coat. The man studied her for a long moment before speaking again. They're calling you Mama. The little girl nodded shyly, and the boy's hand tightened on his sister's. Margaret's breath caught, not from shame, not from fear, but from something she hadn't felt in years. For a moment, Margaret didn't move. The heat of the platform seemed to fade, replaced by the cool, uncertain weight of the man's gaze. Thomas Avery tipped his hat, not in the practiced charm of town men, but with the quiet respect of someone who had seen too many goodbyes. They've been without a mother for near 3 years, he said. Haven't called anyone that since. Margaret's fingers curled against the handle of her carpet bag. I'm sorry. You must be mistaken. I don't even know them. Thomas nodded slowly, as if he expected that answer. Maybe so. But they know kindness when they see it. His eyes softened toward the children. That's more than most folks can say out here. The girl Lydia, he called her, stepped forward first, her small hand brushing against Margaret's skirt, as if testing the fabric. The boy Eli hung back, watching with the guarded eyes of a child who'd learned trust could be taken away. Margaret had seen those eyes before, once in the mirror years ago. I was told, she began, her voice catching, that someone was coming for me. Thomas glanced toward the far end of the platform where the last few passengers were leaving. Looks like they didn't. Worlds full of men who make promises they don't intend to keep. The words landed heavy but not cruel. He spoke them like someone who knew the taste of being left. Train leaves again tomorrow morning, he added. Till then, you'll need a place to stay. My ranch is quiet. You'd be welcome. Margaret hesitated, the old lessons of caution rising in her mind. Yet Lydia's fingers stayed curled in her skirt, warm and trembling. In the distance, the wind stirred the prairie grass, carrying a faint smell of rain. Something in it felt like a door opening. Thomas stepped aside, waiting for her answer. The ride to Thomas Avery's ranch was longer than Margaret expected. The wagon wheels creaked over rutted paths, each turn of the wheel carrying her further from the station, and further from the life she thought she was waiting for. Lydia sat close beside her head, resting lightly against Margaret's arm. Eli kept to the far corner of the bench, eyes scanning the open fields as if he half expected someone or something to follow. Margaret stole glances at Thomas, his shoulders broad beneath a worn duster, his silence steady but not cold. He asked no questions about her past, and for that she was oddly grateful. The ranch came into view just as the sun dipped low, casting the sky in ribbons of gold and violet. Fences stretched out in every direction, and beyond them cattle grazed in the fading light. A home stood at the center, a modest structure with a wraparound porch and a single rocking chair swaying in the breeze. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and wood smoke. Margaret set her carpet bag near the door, unsure how long she'd be here or if she even belonged. Thomas motioned toward the kitchen table. "There's stew on the stove. Won't be much, but it's hot." Margaret nodded, but the weight in her chest grew. She wasn't supposed to be here. She had been promised a new start, a husband who'd written warm letters. And yet here she was, taken in by a man who owed her nothing. That night, as she lay in a narrow bed with the wind tapping at the window, the memories came. Of a younger Margaret standing in a too small dress, while her mother scolded her for her size. Of a marriage proposal that had been withdrawn when her fiancé decided he wanted someone prettier. She had built her life on the belief that if she worked hard, stayed kind, and kept her head down, good might eventually come. But now she wasn't so sure. From somewhere down the hall came the sound of Lydia's soft laugh, followed by Thomas's low voice. It was a sound that reached something deep in her, a reminder that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the wrong place to be. Still, her heart whispered caution. She was a guest, temporary, and she had no idea what Thomas truly wanted from her. The next morning, Margaret awoke to the sound of boots on the porch. She pushed aside the curtain and saw Thomas saddling his horse, the brim of his hat pulled low against the wind. She stepped into the kitchen to find Lydia already stirring porridge over the stove. "Pa says there's trouble with the south fence," Lydia murmured. "A calf got out last night. He's taking Eli with him." Margaret's instinct was to offer help, but she bit her tongue. This wasn't her place. She was still only a stranger here. Still, when Eli passed by with his jacket slung over his shoulder, he paused. "You good at mending?" he asked, not meeting her eyes. "I can stitch anything from a shirt to a saddle," she replied softly. His only answer was a small nod before he followed Thomas out into the cold. The day stretched long. Margaret mended a ripped sleeve she found in the wash pile, swept the kitchen, and even gathered eggs from the hen house, though her fingers stung from the frost. She told herself it was simply to repay kindness. But truthfully, she wanted to feel useful again. By dusk, the men returned, wind-burned and tired. Thomas glanced at the kitchen table where supper waited. "You cooked?" he asked, his voice low. Margaret straightened. "I thought it might help." He gave a slow nod, and though his face was unreadable, something in his eyes softened. They ate in near silence, the only sound the crackle of the fire. But beneath that quiet, something was shifting in awareness that they were slowly weaving into each other's days. Later, as Margaret carried a pail of water outside, she caught Thomas on the porch, his gaze fixed on the dark horizon. Without looking at her, he said, "Storm's coming. Might be snow by morning. Best you stay close." It wasn't just a warning about weather. It felt like the first thread of belonging. Still, Margaret's heart wrestled with doubt. She had learned long ago that kindness could be taken back and promises could sour. Was she reading too much into a few small gestures? Or was something real beginning here? The snowstorm came harder than anyone expected. By mid-morning, the wind howled like a living thing, rattling the windows and piling drifts against the barn. Margaret was in the kitchen when Lydia burst in, cheeks flushed. "The barn door's blown open. The cows'll freeze." Without thinking, Margaret grabbed her shawl and boots. She knew the wind would cut like knives, but she also knew cattle could be lost in a matter of hours. Outside, the snow blinded her. She could barely see 10 feet ahead, but she kept moving toward the barn. Her skirts caught in the drifts, slowing her down, but she pushed on, calling to the cows in a steady voice. Inside, the animals were restless, their breath rising in clouds. She fought the door shut against the wind, then began hauling extra hay, her hands numb, but her mind set. One by one, she checked each animal, rubbing their flanks, making sure the smallest calves had bedding. By the time Thomas and Eli arrived, she was standing in the center of the barn, hair wet with melting snow, breathing hard, but calm. "What in blazes?" Thomas started, but stopped. His eyes took in the secured door, the fed animals, the order she'd brought to the chaos. "You'd have lost the calf by the far stall if I hadn't come," she said simply. Eli gave a low whistle. "She's tougher than she looks." Thomas's gaze lingered on her, something unspoken passing between them. It wasn't gratitude alone, it was the first crack in his guarded distance. That night after the storm eased, he set a cup of hot coffee in front of her, without a word. She accepted it, feeling the warmth seep into her hands, and somewhere deeper. But with warmth came fear. She had been here before, standing at the edge of trust, wondering if it would hold or shatter. Could she let herself step closer to someone who could just as easily turn away? 3 nights after the storm trouble came riding into town. Margaret was just leaving the mercantile when she heard the low, mocking voices. 3 men strangers leaning against the hitching post, their eyes sliding over her, like she was a thing to be measured and mocked. Well, now one of them drawled, "Guess they'll let just about anyone shop here these days." Another smirked. Bet the floorboards groaned under her weight. It was the kind of cruelty she'd learned to ignore all her life, except this time someone else heard it too. Thomas. He had been across the street talking with the blacksmith. The moment the words reached him, he went still. Not stiff with embarrassment, not pretending he hadn't heard, still like a man deciding exactly how far he was willing to go. He crossed the street in slow, deliberate steps, boots crunching against the hard-packed snow. "You got a problem with her," he said quietly. "Then you got a problem with me." The tallest of the 3 laughed. "We just talking, cowboy, don't mean nothing." Thomas didn't blink. "Then apologize. Now." The laughter died. Something in his tone, low, even and sure, made the air colder than the winter wind. One by one, they muttered half-hearted apologies, avoiding Margaret's eyes. Thomas turned to her, then his voice softening. "You all right?" For a moment, she couldn't speak. No one had ever stood between her and the world like that, not without wanting something in return. "I am now," she said. That night, as they rode back to the ranch, silence stretched between them. But it wasn't the wary kind anymore. It was warm, like the space between 2 people who knew they were moving toward the same fire. For the first time in years, Margaret felt the weight of her life shift, not from her shoulders to someone else's, but shared like 2 hands holding the same rope. Spring crept in quietly that year. Snow melted into the thirsty earth, the cottonwoods along the creek showing the first soft green. Margaret stood on the porch of Thomas's ranch house, apron dusted with flour, watching his 2 children chase each other in the yard. They laughed without the guardedness she'd seen when she first met them. Every so often, one would glance at her just to make sure she was watching and wave. Thomas came up behind her boots, whispering against the boards. "Biscuits smell good," he said with a smile. "They'll be ready in a minute," she replied. He didn't go inside. Instead, he leaned on the railing beside her, looking out at the same view. "You've done something here, Margaret." She glanced at him, puzzled. "What do you mean, the kids?" "The house. Me. We're lighter now, like you've opened a window we didn't know we needed." Her throat tightened. "I haven't done anything but be here." "That's the thing," he said softly. "Being here is what we needed." One of the children, the youngest, suddenly ran up the porch steps and wrapped his arms around her waist. "Mama, can we have honey with the biscuits?" The word hung in the air. Mama. Margaret felt the sting of tears, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from something she thought she'd lost forever, belonging. Thomas didn't correct the child. He just met her gaze and gave a small, steady nod. The sun slipped lower, painting the yard in gold, and Margaret realized sometimes love didn't arrive with a gallop and a shout. Sometimes it came quietly on the feet of children and stayed because you opened the door. Sometimes life has a way of giving us back what we thought we had lost forever. Margaret never went to that station looking for love or even for a home. She had simply learned to stand on her own feet, carry her own burdens, and keep walking, even when the road was lonely. But that day, a quiet moment on a dusty platform turned into something far greater, A place at the table, children's laughter in the kitchen, and the kind of love that sees you for who you are, not what the world says you're worth. In the West, storms pass and grass grows again. And in the heart, too, after seasons of drought, kindness can bloom where we least expect it. Margaret's story is a reminder that sometimes family is chosen, not born. And sometimes the people who were once strangers become the ones you can't imagine life without. If you've ever felt left behind, remember the story isn't over until Grace walks in. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever found love, family, or friendship when you weren't even looking? Share your story in the comments. If this touched your heart, please subscribe to None. Wild West Saga for more stories like this, tales of hope, healing, and the unexpected blessings of late blooming love. And if you'd like a part 2 or more endings like this, let me know below.